Right, this last section is on angles of elevation and depression. So it's still the same thing we've been doing for the past 2 units, but now it's word problems, so we have to know what angles of elevation and depression are. So angle of elevation is formed by a horizontal line and a line of sight above it. So pretty much is if you're looking at an angle from the bottom and then up, that creates an angle of elevation. So in this example, angle A is my angle of elevation. Angle of depression is formed by a horizontal line, which is this one right here, and a line of sight below. So pretty much if you're on top, you're looking at an angle below, then that would be an angle of depression. And so in this picture, angle B is the angle of depression. Also, if you notice, your angle of elevation is always inside of your triangle, while your angle of depression is always outside of your triangle. So that's another way that you can remember that. One more important thing that you should know is that angles of elevation and angles of depression are equal to each other because they create alternate interior angles. Right, so since we're working with word problems, I gave you a list of keywords that will help you label your picture correctly when you're working with word problems. So anytime that you see these words, how high, height, tall, altitude, or above, all those words will indicate that you're labeling the vertical side of your triangle. To label the bottom of your triangle, you would see the words horizontal distance, and sometimes they use the word ground distance. And then to label the hypotenuse, which is the slanted part of your triangle, you would see, for example, ladder, ramp, stairs, or an escalator, a slide, anything that's slanted, that would tell you to label your hypotenuse. And so now you see the keywords. Let's look at some examples. So here we have example 1. It says Harry wants to build a bicycle ramp 6 feet above the ground at an angle of elevation of 2 degrees. So my keyword here is he wants the ramp 6 feet above the ground. And so if you remember my keywords, if I see the word above, that's telling me that's the height of my triangle, the vertical side. So here's the height of my triangle. That has to be 6 feet above the ground at an angle of elevation of 2 degrees. So an angle of elevation is always inside of my triangle and is from the bottom looking up. So this is my angle of elevation. It's 2 degrees. And now it's asking me to find the length of the ramp. So again, keyword ramp, that's telling me label the hypotenuse, the slanted part. So since they're asking me to find the ramp, that's my X. I'll put my X right there. So now that I labeled my picture, it goes back to what we were doing in 10.2. We're solving for a side. The ramp is a side. So we are going to set up my equation. But before I do that, I have to identify what the 6 and the X are. And so the 6 is on the opposite side of my angle. That means it has to be O for opposite. And the hypotenuse is the longest side, is my X. So I'm going to label that with H. So I have O and H. That means I'm using sine for this problem. So I'm going to use sine of the angle equals opposite over hypotenuse. So I am going to plug in, and I have sine of angle 2 equals 6 over x, and then I have to solve this equation. And if you remember from 10.2, we have to get rid of that fraction first. So we multiply it by the denominator so it can cancel, and I gotta do it on both sides. So now the only thing that's left on the right side is the 6. and on the right side I have x times the sine of 2. So I am not done yet because the x is not by itself. I gotta get rid of the sign that's right next to it. So the opposite of multiplication is division. So I'm gonna divide by the sine of 2 so that it cancels out. But I gotta do it on both sides. I gotta divide by sine of 2 on the right side. And so this is gonna give me my answer now. Now I have x by itself on the left side, and to get my answer I'm going to divide 6 divided by sine of 2. I'm going to do it in my calculator. So I'm going to take 6 divided 6 divided by the sine of 2, and so that gives me 171.92 feet. So the length of the ramp is 171.92 feet. Okay, so now I'm going to look at example 2. Example 2 says Emily is atop an 850-foot high skyscraper. She sees her house at an angle of depression of 38 degrees. Determine the horizontal distance to her house. So she's on top of an 850 feet high skyscraper. So high, that's my keyword. It's the height of the building. So I'm going to label the building with 850. Then it says she sees her house at an angle of depression of 38. So now angle of depression. On the previous example I had angle of elevation, now it's angle of depression. So my angle of depression is going to be from the top looking down, and it's going to be outside, so it's going to be this angle. It's 38 degrees. And they want me to find out the horizontal distance. So horizontal, that's the bottom of my triangle, so that's where my x goes. Horizontal distance, that's my x. Alright, I cannot use sine, tangent, or cosine if I have an angle that's outside of my triangle. I can only use it if the angle is inside of my triangle, interior. So I cannot use that 38. But if you remember, I mentioned that angles of elevation are equal to angles of depression because they're alternate interior. So on my picture, I'm going to label this angle as 38 degrees because they're alternate interior, so they're the same, and this is now the angle of elevation. So now I'm going to ignore the 38 that I have outside. I cannot use it because it's outside. I'm going to work with the one that's inside of my triangle. So now, based on this angle, the x is right next to it, the leg that's right next to it, so that would mean that x is adjacent. And then across from it, opposite from it, I have the 850. So that means that this is my O, the opposite side. And so now I have O and A, and so that's tangent. So I'm going to use tangent for this problem. So my problem now is tangent of my angle equals opposite over adjacent. That's my formula. So I'm going to plug in into my formula. So my angle is 38, the O is 850, the X is, or the A is X. So turns out to be same process that I did for number 1, but now I'm using tangent, but it's the same process. So I'm going to get rid of I'm going to get X by itself. So I'm going to get rid of the fraction. So multiply by the denominator and it cancels. And you gotta do it on both sides. So now I have x times the tangent of 38 equals 850. It's the only thing that was left on the right side. But I'm not done because the x is not by itself. All I did was move it on the other side. So tangent's still next to it. I gotta get rid of the tangent. So opposite of multiplication is division. So that cancels. And I gotta do it on both sides. So now this is gonna give me my answer. I'm gonna divide 850 by tangent of 38. So my answer is 1087.95. So that is the distance from the building to her house. Okay, and then the last example that we're going to look at is a little bit different. And let's see why. So example 3. So Susie's workout routine includes running up a flight of 50-foot stairs. If the horizontal distance of the stairs is 42 feet, determine the angle of elevation of the stairs. So stairs is one of my keywords. She has to run up a flight of 50-foot stairs. I'm going to label the stairs with a 50. Horizontal distance of the stairs is 42. So here's my other keyword. Horizontal distance is 42. Remember, horizontal is the bottom of my triangle. It's 42. Determine the angle of elevation. So now they're no longer asking me to solve for a side. They're asking me to solve for an angle. And so I'm trying to determine the angle of elevation. If you remember, angle of elevation is always from the bottom looking up. So now I'm trying to figure out that angle, so that's x. And so I'm still gonna label my two sides that have measurements. So the 50 is the longest side, is the hypotenuse. So this is gonna be h. The 42 is the leg that's right next to my angle, so it has to be adjacent. So now I have a and h, so this time is cosine. So now I'm using cosine, which is a over h. It's my formula. So I'm going to plug in now. So cosine of x, which is what I'm looking for, equals adjacent 42 over hypotenuse 50. So if you remember, these ones are easier because I don't have to solve an equation to solve it. All I have to do is take the inverse of cosine, or 42 over 50. And this is going to give me my answer. So anytime they're asking you for an angle, that's when you use the inverse functions, which have the little exponent of -1. That means inverse. So I'm going to go to my calculator and I'm going to type the inverse of cosine, or 42 over 50. And I get 32.86 because I'm rounding to the nearest hundred, so 32.86. And so 32.86, yeah. So this would be my answer. Okay, so just be careful if they're asking you to solve for a side. That's when you use the regular sine, cosine, and tangent. If they're asking you to solve for an angle, that's when you use the inverse sine, inverse cosine, and inverse tangent.